going to give a little quick intro. Many of you know who Joe Mullings is, but I'll give you a little background story. When I started my career in medical devices, I was in surgical robotics and I was living down in Florida. And back then I heard about this recruiting firm called Mullings Group. And at the time, I was starting to dabble more with online mediums, digital media such as LinkedIn. And I heard about Joe, and I heard that he was the world's #1 headhunter. And I was like, how the hell can that guy claim that? Is that possible? And the more I learned about him, the more I realized I'm like, this guy is somebody that I definitely want to get connected with, I want to befriend. But I said, how am I going to get his attention? So back then I was writing a lot of articles, and I said, he wrote this article on LinkedIn that I don't think anybody noticed. So I commented on it, reshared it to my network, and then Monday he gives me a call and he's like, hi, Omar Khateeb, this is Joe Mullings. I can't figure out what caused it, but I think you sharing my article got it a little bit more reach. And so I just wanted to reach out and say, hey. So from there we started a wonderful friendship, and he had this vision of how we should be better at storytelling in the medtech industry. And he called me, I remember, on a Thursday to tell me about it, and it compelled me so much that I said, Joe, let me just drive down to Miami. I was in Orlando, I was like about a 3-4 hour drive. I said, let me drive down to you so we can talk. We spent a day, and he laid out this vision, and it was very much in line with how I believe that our industry needs to be doing this. And the best part about this is that him and his team has not only grown, but they've led and exemplified this by executing it to the market and made our industry much better than it is. Unfortunately, I wish there was more Joes in this world, but hey, I'm happy that at least there's one. One quick thing I want to note in terms of a really impressive hallmark, those of you who know about it, Verb Surgical was a joint venture between Johnson & Johnson and Google. And Joe and his team came with a digital storytelling strategy to Verb, and their directive was within the first year they had to hire 150 people, and over the next 30 months they had to hire 270 people. You don't have to be a recruiter to realize that's incredibly hard, especially given this area. And they delivered on that. So without further ado, I wanted to invite Joe, and of course with his busy schedule, he came down to share from a very high level what the market is doing and how we can be better about not only storytelling, but managing our brand reputations at our company. So,
yeah, thanks. And just to add on that, the Verb J&J joint venture, that JV, we couldn't talk about the robot. We couldn't show any of the engineering. We couldn't let individuals in the hallways at Google. And they had an interview in about an 8x12 room. Then after 1 p.m. was a sweatbox. And then they wanted people from Tesla. You even interviewed there. From Tesla, LinkedIn, Facebook, Intuitive, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to develop, and I had a very courageous and evangelistic leader in Scott Hunnekens, who with our team, I think changed the face of talent acquisition and sort of reputation building. I don't like to use the word brand, but reputation building in the industry. So that's just some additional on that with the use of digital strategy in the workplace.
Absolutely. And for those of you, has anyone heard of True Future TV? No. So one thing I want you to look up is True Future TV. It's very much like an Anthony Bourdain approach to our industry. And the best part about it is that it's telling the story about what our industry does, and more importantly, how it makes a great impact to society and of course to the patients and doctors. So that being said, John, I want to ask you, what's the industry not doing right?
It's a pretty broad statement, but from a digital perspective, I think what we've got to do is spend a lot more time thinking about building our reputation in the marketplace. Historically, organizations build a narrative around a product or a platform, and rarely do they build a narrative around reputation. I was just chatting with over here at lunchtime, and when you drive marketing around a product, you're leaving yourself at a very high liability that product doesn't quite turn out to be what you want it to be. And I think what you've got to do is build a hiring narrative and a sort of a reputation narrative around your organization, and stay away from data, stay away from stats, but start to tell stories about the organization, high frequency, high cadence, and not look for the kill shot, but a chorus of voices around building that. And just before we get started, I'm going to help everybody here. Let's throw the word brand out the door, because that sort of makes people cringe, and let's use the word reputation. And then every time I slip and I use the word social, let's replace it with the word internet. So reputation and internet, because when I say social, you think of selfies and vacation videos and duck lips. And
Joe takes the best duck lip selfies I've ever seen on Instagram. It's unbelievable.
and when I say brand, people sort of think of shallow and material things, but really brand is reputation. So let's just, for our sake, remain moving towards the conversation versus away reflexively.
So why don't we start with Verb as a good example? You guys did a wonderful job with telling the stories of the people at Verb. How did that help to recruit in an incredibly competitive market?
So from a talent acquisition perspective, first of all, I happen to select two of the darkest professions to be in. I'm a headhunter, which means I'm a flesh peddler. And I own a production company that focuses on the life sciences world. So I'm in the ad agency business. So, those two things, we looked at them a different way and we thought we were going to weaponize them. And I use the word weaponize because media is an incredibly powerful tool. You can tell people what to think, and we've had a president elected that way. You can tell people what to think. You can tell them what to focus on, which in turn means they don't focus on something else. So with Verb, what we did, again, I had an evangelistic CEO. Our salaries were well below the marketplace. Again, we couldn't show the robot or show the back door. But what we did is we focused on what we did have as assets. And that was the 4 pillars that and I would write this down. The 4 pillars, when you're going to put out any sort of reputation building, need to be the market, your product or service in that market, the leadership, and the mission. And when you're putting out information, the first thing you have to do is you have to build a credibility around the market that you're in. And you want to use third-party references and non-biased or self-serving information. And that market needs to be explored a la the Gretzky hockey puck statement. For those that follow hockey, Gretzky was great not because he knew where the puck was. He was great, he said, because he knew where the puck was going to be. So when you're building a narrative around hiring, but it translates to everything else, you want to build up the conversation around the market and where it's going to be in 3 years, not where it is today. And then what you want to do is you want to shift your messaging to how does your product or service thereby serve that high growth market or that high growth or high opportunity in that market. And then the third pillar is leadership or the people. Our moms and dad told us we are the 5 people we hang around with. And that holds true if you think about it. Most of you took your recent career, most career decisions about who was working in the company because you wanted to hang around them because you were going to be around them 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. And then finally, mission. I know the word why is overused a lot, but used properly. In this meeting today, I saw it used best ever. Why do you show up? They weren't showing up to make a robot. They were showing up to potentially drive a surgical platform or digital platform that may save their child or their mom one day. And so we wrapped all that up and we balanced that against compensation and we balanced that against the resistance to move to another career or switch jobs. And when you build that up and you have that chorus out there in a high frequency, high cadence, too much messaging is done looking for the kill shot or the big whale campaign. You've got to look at it like this. And when you look at it like this over time, 12, 24, 36 months, your slope of your line goes like this. When you go for the kill, you get hung up in vanity metrics. And you get hung up on what you're spending. And then where you advertise or try and influence matters. How many people here actually, when you're sitting on the couch and a commercial comes on, actually watch the commercial? Versus do that. Yet there are billions of dollars a year spent by pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, on TV commercials. I'm not saying you shouldn't have that in your portfolio, but it shouldn't be your go-to move. It should be a cadence of other on the social platforms. So I hope that answers the question, at least gives a backdrop on it. Any questions on any of that?
I don't know when you started this, how many years ago, but in today's digital world, is there any change in this?
Is there any change in
Yeah,
this?
cadence, channels, or it
Well,
doesn't matter?
Yeah, so good question. So it matters what you're trying to address. So I think if you think about the internet like network TV, and we had NBC, ABC, CBS. And to actually put a commercial on those networks cost a lot of money. The ability to influence and educate and inform right now, and that's really what you should be doing when you're building a reputation, has never been leveled where I actually have my brand next to Mercedes-Benz, Louis Vuitton, right? Any of those major brands, and it doesn't cost me any money. I couldn't have done that on ABC, NBC, CBS. But then you also have to understand the psyche at which you're directing your message, because you can't direct it all the same. So in our industry, LinkedIn, I would be almost 95% of my effort in LinkedIn. Most people here probably think of LinkedIn as an employment or a job hunting platform. Yet it is a learning platform. And if you want to efficiently really influence people, you've got to inform, entertain, and educate. And you have to look at the platform, and let's just take three of them: Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If I was in pharma, I would have some of my spend on Facebook and Instagram because that's DTC, direct to customer. If I'm a med tech company, I'd have 95% of my spend on LinkedIn, because we're the same person, but we're different psyches when we look at each of those platforms. Does everybody here have a LinkedIn page, Instagram page, and then Facebook? Okay, so it's a pretty good distribution. There's a couple people who have decided not to enter that. But when you're on LinkedIn, you don't want to see kitty videos. You're the same person, but if you see a kitty video on Facebook, you're like, oh, look how cute, right? Or it's not appropriate to the picture of your kids or yourself on a beach somewhere on your Instagram account. So you've got to adjust based upon what message you're trying to send and the platform you're on. And there's a chorus that needs to occur on all three.
So something I want to go back to is, I think, based on your 4 pillars that you mentioned, there's some of those that, whether it's medtech, biotech, or pharma, that people are used to. They need to get better in terms of the cadence and the quality of content. But I want to focus on one of those pillars, which is the market. You mentioned third-party validation. Pharma does a pretty good job of doing that, and when he says third-party validation, a big part of that is PR, right? Public relations. But can you talk a little bit more about, the best case scenarios in terms of how you do that and how you serve those pillars in the market?
So you've got the opportunity to use a couple vehicles. One is short copy and short and long form copy, and then you have short and long form video. And then you have a blend, a hybrid of those. And then you've got the ability to use other people's. Think of yourself either as an original content or original songwriter, or you're a DJ or a cover band. And so when you put out content, you want to look at which of those characters are you playing right now. So the third party is you're ending up being a DJ, and you're deploying other people's content on your platform, looking for either verification, validation, or you're starting to circle a discussion that you're trying to set up way back here when you deliver your product or your sort of value prop to the market. But you want it to be not self-serving. So you want to use articles, you want to use other people's publish, you want to use white papers, dependent on the discussion you're trying to sort of move towards your solution, your value prop. And that requires sometimes days, sometimes weeks at a time, where I'll give you an example, and I'll try and use real life examples. We just locked up a contract with a client, I can't say who it is, but they're a robotics company. And they're doing a robotic play in a space that has not had yet a robotic platform put on. And I've got a heavy lift coming on the recruiting side. I am going to, over the next 4 weeks, focus on the stroke market in particular, and the lack of a solution out there for that, whatever study you read, the 1 or 3 hour window. And we'll start talking about what stroke does, and maybe even highlight some people who have been impacted that. Also studies around that and how others believe and have been identified that that's a good market for careers to go into. And then what we'll start to do is start to release a cadence of awareness and attention around our client. And so it's a multi-level, multi-deployment. It's not that home run hit. It's layers and layers upon third-party information. I play the DJ or I play the cover band because I may write some copy around that on the article that's put out. And then we'll start to deploy original content or original songwriter content directly showing our client of those other 4 pillars, is what the leadership and what the mission is and what their product is and how it addresses that market.
The content then created, right? Is it targeted at a specific user like the payer, the patient, the physician, or it doesn't matter?
It depends what I'm trying to get done. I always have a primary, secondary, tertiary target list. And so I make sure that when my content's going out, again, I talk about that chorus, is I always have a primary target. But I also keep in mind my secondary and tertiary targets, because no campaign or no effort lives in isolation. So while, again, from the hiring perspective, I may go after that stroke market, but I may also be sure I'm deploying over to the data scientists that I know I'm going to have to hit in 3 months from now and influence them. Because they're watching all the time. And what you want to do is you want to start to build up that cadence, start to build up that awareness around it so they're ready to receive the argument. You've got to soften the target, as I like to call it, in that market you're going after, so they're able to receive the data. Because if they're not aware of what you're trying to do, but all of a sudden you send out a signal that now speaks directly to them, but they've been prepped for that based upon, oh, the stroke market is very interesting. Here's the numbers, here's the solutions. Keeping in mind, we make decisions emotionally and justify them logically. So as you put your content together, you've got to make sure that you're first appealing to the emotional side, and then you're backing that up with data. Where too many organizations and too many people will choke you with data, and then you, look, when Frank started today, he put up 3 data slides. I fell asleep. And he knows better, right? So that you weren't engaged in that. You immediately shut down when you see data slides, unless you're absolutely combing over data for that specific reason. But if I'm looking to influence you, I first have to get you to buy in emotionally.
So any of those platforms work with pages, you know, it has a profile. Are you basically throwing data points at your target audience from the same origin, if you will? I mean, I don't know if I can explain.
What do you mean by data points?
Like, you know, so you have the videos coming out, like first informational, and then you slowly get down to more specifics, like the ask almost. Mm-hmm. Is that coming from the same data source from
Yes.
your group?
Yes.
So you basically, from one channel, but you're very deliberate about it. It's more about the timing, basically, than where it comes from.
Think of it like you're telling a story, and it's multiple chapters. And there's not an end or a beginning to what you're doing. But and Sinek talks about it, it's really an infinite game. I don't look at campaigns ever as a start and a finish to a campaign. And I make sure that I am just have an infinite loop going on there and trying to influence that decision maker. And I'm not trying to get that person go from A to D. I'm just trying to get them bumped over to A to A+ before I get them to B. And I take my time and I have patience. Too many times we look for the home run. Yep. And what we've got to do is slowly influence over time.
And you influence the people surrounding that person. Right?
And I influence the people surrounding that person. Icky and I had that conversation. We were trying, I can't tell you exactly what it was, we were trying to influence a point of influence and advocacy for something to do with a bill relative to the industry. And rather than go to that politician, we encircled all the people around that person who influenced them. And we had that be, you and I talked about that before, I did, my wife does it to me, and went all around it, influenced all the people surrounding that individual. So what does that mean at a market level? If you were trying to reach somebody in a certain, like specifically at somebody, I would reverse engineer who are the people surrounding that person and influence them with that data. And they then will bring it to the key decision maker. So that, yes, absolutely, we do that as well.
So do you and your client decide what that time frame would be? Because clients are kind of anxious
Yeah.
to see what's going on and what they're paying for, and
Yeah.
investors and blah, blah, blah. So how much time are you allowed
Sure.
to show any significant, even A+ to A+?
That's a good question. So, when clients come to us, the first thing I have to do is manage their expectations. And there are KPIs that can run within 30, 60, 90 days. Absolutely can. And you educating a client as to this is the way that we are going to create this wave of influence over time, because we want is depth. I want depth here. And I just don't want shallow, because shallow can get shrugged off really quickly. So we just manage expectations. And I've walked away from a lot of clients that want something turned around in 30 days. And I said, first of all, I can't do that. One is not because I don't have the manpower. The other, it's because I just won't put my firm in that position, right? Because we are not known. You don't even know you're being influenced when you follow us on LinkedIn. And that's the most powerful side. Our philosophy is give, 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 and then be standing in plain sight when somebody needs something. And
So
that is
where are you on LinkedIn? Where do you
Mullings.
put your messages? Huh?
Look at my page, Joe Mullings, right?
I need your card.
Yeah, I'll give it to you.
So I violently agree with everything you said, Joe. I think it's spot on in terms of how do you integrate that with clients. One component that I found, and you probably grew up in the same days I did in positioning, where Reese and Trout had this old idea of positioning, which worked really well when media was print and broadcast. I think now that we've encompassed many other channels and medium, right, I think this whole idea of finding purpose becomes much more important and allows you to umbrella and sit over things like social media, right, like all the other digital channels that we're more used to using now. And that feels a lot more productive with a lot of clients that I've worked with as well. And then it becomes more about, not about what you make, but what you make happen. And it's much better to tell that story, particularly in the industry that we're living in today. Right, we all make these molecules, we all make this stuff in a vial, right? But think about the additional birthdays you create, the additional family relationships, the ability to do, what we call really like healthy lifespan now as opposed to just lifespan.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important component that I like to think about in beginning this journey. The other part is a little bit more tactical, is about when you're working in the social media space. And everybody wants to, I want to go viral, I want to go viral, I want to be Chewbacca mom, right? And you can't deliver that. And you made a good point of it right now in managing their expectations and what's real. The part of that I always talk about is the idea that it's like joining a new club or being invited out to a dinner party where you don't know a lot of people. And in the beginning, you just have to create some credibility and interest.
Correct.
Right? That people want to talk to you, that you have something credible to say in the room. Once you've reached that point where people are sharing what you've got to say, then you can begin to put your own content in there and spin your own story and take a seat at the head of that table.
Correct. You're exactly right, and that's what happened to us in our 4-year journey. Is we already had credibility in the search business, but in an analog function. One phone call, one point of influence, one conversation, hang up the phone, do it again. And then what we did is we knew we were credible, but now what we wanted to do was we wanted to expand that. And so here's another equation for you to remember. An average product with outstanding reach crushes a great product with minimal reach. And so that holds over on social / the internet, is that if we want to create influence, and again, reach doesn't mean your brand name. Reach means what message are you trying to tell at that moment in time. And there's got to be multiple channels going on from our pharmaceutical and biotech companies on those channels. It's not just one, hey, we're Pfizer and we're great. It's got to be multiple channels going on multiple times, and an endless loop that you're not looking for a start and a finish. But I know it sounds basic, but with that, not many pharma, biotech, medtech companies have even attempted to increase their reach on the internet, meaning social, which is
I'll
just,
take 10 shares over 100 likes.
and on the other side of that is, forget about metrics, because if you're going to respond to metrics, which are vanity metrics, it's not going to drive that authenticity that I've heard thrown around a lot today. Is you have to stay true to it. It took us a year and a half of people judging us, saying we went Hollywood, thought it was all vanity. Even my wife's friends were like, what's with Joe, right? So you've got to be courageous enough to step out there and just put your stuff out, not care about vanity metrics. And that's a very important point. Question.
So from the transition from vanity metrics to metrics that matter to a business, a lot of your focus, as I've observed, has been on the employee brand, the employer, building brand to build the company. How about to build the revenue line? How have you seen these tactics work to actually grow revenue for a company?
Great question. So getting revenue has a number of components associated with it, right? So the easy one for me would be, bringing in 20 new employees drives revenue, right? But we have clients that we were in part seriously responsible for A and B round financing. How's that so? Well, with 80,000 eyes on us every day in the med tech industry, probably more, we've got the M&A people, we've got venture capital, we've got PE, we've got the market biz development, because you get on in the morning, 7:30, you see what I post, and the number of people who watch that and see a company, if not but for, that was not on the radar screen. I never call fundraising revenue, because I don't like that, but when you're a startup, that's the only revenue you have. So we've been responsible for that. Omar could probably give you a case study with Joe Urban, who's the CEO of Potrero. I think we tremendously influenced their reputation and built an awareness around the AKI market, which Omar has incredibly done a good job of taking over after we left.
Yeah, and I think the big thing was, when I started at Potrero, just so you know, Potrero is a partnership with Medline Industries, so we didn't do any product marketing, we were reliant on them. And when Joe and his group came in, they created these, what's called Potrero portraits, these videos of the different people in Potrero, and that's all we had to work with. I didn't start marketing our product aggressively until maybe 4 or 5 months ago. So how do we get all of this, I'm going to wait for that plane to go. How do we get all this traction with the market? Well, some of the content that they provided with us, that's what allowed us to start storytelling to the market, not only to, recruit better, but also to prospects such as physicians and hospital administrators. You might ask yourself, well, who cares? Why is that important? If we think about this, the history of America, who comes to mind? George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. But there are thousands of Americans, right, that were involved in the building of America. Why these people? Because when it comes to stories, we distill them down to a few key people that we associate the story with. So with Potrero, we did that with our CEO, our Chief Technology Officer, a couple of the junior engineers. And the story and reputation of Potrero was carried in those people and in their stories. So when the market, i.e. the hospital administrators, the surgeons, the physicians, saw these stories, they put a story to it, they put a face to it, and they were able to not only gain the attention of the market, but that's how you start building trust. And I can say today, and hopefully in a year I'll start presenting those case studies, that a year and a half later, those same things helped move things forward to start producing deals with hospitals that we have never even touched base with, we've never met in person, but because they started following and engaging with us, that's how it started. The thing that drives me nuts in our industry, and Joe's one of the only people who understands this, is to get to the point of persuasion and influence. 50% of it is getting attention. If you don't understand that, all these other things that we talk about, metrics, how do we educate patients, all these things, if you don't know how to get attention first, all this other stuff doesn't matter.
And one of the components that we use, just to go a little deeper in a case study there, is again, evangelistic visionary CEO, we thought of who would be interesting to have podcasts with, and then videotape those, and obviously on the audio side. So we brought in Greg Shearer, who is lead at Mayo, right, and sat down with him. We brought in, what's his name from Google, lead data scientist out of there.
Rajan Patel.
And we sat with them, and we chatted, myself, Joe, and each of them. And we talked about that third-party market, where Shearer talked about what does acute kidney injury mean, both from a patient perspective, a caregiver perspective, and the economics to the market. And Patel talked about how does predictive analytics and data analytics that we're even using in Google translate over, because he sits as an advisor to them, translate over, and how does it impact that product, but then impacts the patient. And so you start to build this substrate out. And upon that, as Omar said, you don't know where you're going to deploy or weaponize that awareness yet, because there were many, many people who were watching those conversations going on. And one could have been a candidate, one could have been a potential hospital administrator, one could have been a scientist who maybe had done collaborative study and brought that over. So when you ask the question about revenue, if you're just looking for dollar, that's a different campaign, but the physics work the same. If I want to drive revenue and I'm a commercial-facing product, or she just left, she has this, an app for the phone that handles migraines. Well, I would absolutely be having all kinds of conversations on a social platform on that and directing it towards that.
Yeah, just related to what you said, Joe, I was wondering about, and related to your question as well, like for pharma marketers, you know, traditionally it's been about find the right HCP, the prescriber, et cetera, influence them, whether through a KOL or through their network. As you guys have taken this approach, and maybe it's more of that drip and, you know, a little bit of awareness and then so on and so forth, have you seen examples like that working with, say, the HCP as a consumer on the LinkedIn platform or on social media or internet generally, so that we can apply those types of capabilities instead of, hey, here's a scientific article, here's the, you know, ASCO presentation, or here's the whatever scientific thing, but more about the stories that you're talking about.
Yeah. So all of the activities you shared with me in the classic legacy model of influence have been analog. They have been a phone call or a single email to somebody, but it's been an analog function. And so what if we took Komodo and we created Komodo TV on LinkedIn, and we made it an educational platform for human beings, not payers, not physicians, but we created a platform on there that was regularly scheduled content that went out. And you made sure that you knew who your targets were, primary, secondary, tertiary, as you told those stories 5 days a week. And then you used that then to start to influence at scale for people, thousands, tens of thousands perhaps, that then can refer that to somebody else or share that with somebody else. And then what you start to do is when you look at networking, too many people just say, I've got everybody I know in my node of my network. That allows you to jump nodes to now really start a viral approach to be able to scale out. So the reason we went after somebody like Greg was there's somebody who people would not heard about Potrero other than those maybe at a Medline or maybe even a hospital setting due to their analog efforts at marketing. But now I just brought in a strongly influential KOL who has his peers that now start to lean in, have an interest, and come back to Potrero as an example. So I don't know if that helps or not, but it's more of a game plan than a here's A, B, and C. But it takes us getting over not being accustomed to using LinkedIn as a platform where there are 250,000 in medtech alone. I'm going to guess pharma and life sciences on top of that probably brings it over 600,000 people on it, of which 40% go there 4 times a week for free.
And you know, for a lot of people, they wonder like, well, you know, what about prospects? What about doctors? If you search LinkedIn today for cardiothoracic surgeons in North America, just in the U.S., you get 20,000. 20,000, and more physicians are going on there. And the best thing about LinkedIn, if those of you remember Facebook, late 2000s, great organic reach. You post something, everybody saw it. And just like every platform, they get ruined by marketers because Once there's that many eyeballs on it, you have to pay for those campaigns. LinkedIn has the best organic reach. It's not going to last because at this point, everything that we put out, and we worked with the Mullings group with the video content we created, right? Every single physician that we got connected with saw that, because guess what? We were the only game in town posting and creating that content. So within 2 months, a lot of physicians knew about us, a lot of hospital administrators knew about us, and guess what? Petrera doesn't have a sales team, right? But to Joe's point, you have to go on these platforms and actually start doing that and not waiting, because you end up waiting too late, and then you're not very good at posting, you're not good at getting that reach, and then the ROI's bad, and the board says, hey, we shouldn't do that anymore.
And because you don't understand it or you don't agree with it, doesn't make it wrong, right? And so, you know, we oftentimes will hold the past up on a pedestal because we understand it, and we will demonize the future because we don't. And social platforms feel like a really kiddie-like, uncomfortable thing to play on. And our peers, if you went back and said, we're going to do a LinkedIn campaign, my guess is most of your peers would giggle at you either to your face or behind your back. Until they won't. And that's the case with everything. So to all of you here, I would say, you know, be courageous. We celebrate people who live out loud. Every celebrity, every athlete, every entertainer, we celebrate them. We put them on a pedestal, whether you like it or not. Yet we ourselves choose not to live out loud for some reason. And so what I'm suggesting is really think through how you, on your personal brand, because you all have careers, or your company, and I would really start thinking about living out loud on a platform like LinkedIn, and just go with your identity and be who you are on there, and you will figure out what content to be on there. You're all much smarter than I am. All you have to do is dig into and figure out what are the stories that you want to tell on there at scale.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, but the Mullings Group did do the same kind of content creation for Corindus, correct? Mm-hmm. So for those of you who don't know Corindus, it's a vascular robotic company, right? And they were just recently acquired. I remember Corindus a few years ago, and they were not doing a thing. They were struggling, right? And I remember, and my VP is actually here, and he'll confirm this, that about 6 or 9 months ago, I saw Corindus putting out content out of the blue, video of their team, the product, the things that they're doing, right? Nothing has changed. They just started talking and telling the story. And then I noticed that, of course, the Mullings Group was helping doing that. And I remember telling Jeff, I said, Jeff, I think this company's either going to take off or they're going to get acquired. And they ended up getting acquired. And part of that is because it started with getting the attention of the market. And at that point, persuasion and everything else follows. And you know, at least with the pharma industry, definitely medtech is the same way. The thing about that I really embrace and love about this approach that Joe started a few years ago is that when it comes to your company, your product, if you don't do a good job of telling your story, somebody else will. And at that point, it's already too late. And that's usually when something goes wrong, and then we all have to put out a press release, we have to do some damage control, but the story has already been told. And this is where we say, oh, it's the media's fault. And we act as if it's this, you know, elusive thing that we don't know how it works, and it's like, oh, they told the story to the market. But all it has to do is it's not creative, it's just being persistent, constantly telling that story to the market so that your narrative is accepted. So when those things do happen, that they're a flash in the pan, right? And the story and narrative that you've been pushing out is the thing that actually goes through.
And just to wrap it up, because I want to keep on schedule for you. Frank asked me last night, we went to dinner, and he's been following us for a while. And he said, you know, what's your Valhalla? Or what's your end game? And so really, our end game is, you know, we started out as a search firm. Now we happen to be a media company that does search and is crushing it in search well beyond what we were doing previously and dominate the market. But my Valhalla is I want to own and operate the largest media company in the life sciences world. And I want it to be a channel the same way that HGTV is, the same way that Nat Geo is, or the Food Network, because they all started with one show. And all they do is tell stories. And we've got a $500 billion a year medical device industry. And I think biotech and pharma are probably 5 times that. Yet there's not a single place you can go to either see J&J TV or Medtronic TV or stories about products or the young girl who plays for the National Hockey League or women's national hockey team, or an athlete who's recovering because of an ACL implant that they've got. And we, again, to Omar's point, we worry and we get pissed when Smash Mouth Michael Moore TV comes on, like The Bleeding Edge, and we get pissed. But we don't have any counter narrative to it, and we're not telling our story. So I think it's a wide open industry, and my Valhalla is to be telling all these stories on all these companies, on all these wonderful things we're doing, so everything else is no longer a big signal above no noise. It's we've created enough noise that these cheap shot TVs or cheap shot articles get washed out because we have a counter to it.
Tomorrow's gonna come, what's the next best actionable step, the easiest thing that everyone can do to get going tomorrow?
I would say pick 4 or 5 influencers in your market that you're in and 4 or 5 influencers outside your market. And you're all analytics in here, you're all quants, right? I would start looking at what they're doing and how they're presenting their content. And what is that? Is it video? Is it short? Is it long form? And I would just watch what they're doing and see what kind of engagement they get. And if it should be a core competency in your game. Absolutely should be a core competency in your game. And just watch what they're doing. And then just start. Just absolutely start. Be bold and start. And know it's going to take 3, 6, 9, 12 months. That's what I would do. Because success leaves clues. You'll find a vibe. You'll resonate with somebody. There'll be dissonance with others. But just find something that feels like comfy and repeatable for you. And just go do that. Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, buddy.